Picture this: 715 kilograms of suspected cocaine seized in one massive bust. Honestly, this should be a career-defining moment for law enforcement, right? A total textbook victory. But what happens when the entire operation just devolves into a chaotic, contaminated mess? Well, welcome to this explainer on the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. As a criminal justice analyst, I've been mapping out the multi-witness timeline of this exact event, and today we're going to dig into exactly how a massive haul of seized evidence essentially vanished into thin air, all thanks to a completely shattered chain of custody.
This takes us straight into the high-stakes world of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Criminality. We're focusing on 3 incredibly critical days of hearings back in May 2026. And look, this isn't just your standard internal police review. No, this is a highly publicized, rigorous forensic audit of law enforcement integrity. We're going to be breaking down the testimonies of 3 key players: Colonel Makgane, Warrant Officer Phakula, and Captain Nkwana, who you'll also hear referred to in the logs as Sebola. We need to see exactly where standard procedures completely fell apart.
So here's the baseline. We are dealing with 715 kilos of suspected cocaine, located in a shipping container at a Scania yard in Aeroton. But you know what? The real story here isn't actually the drugs, it's the police response. Standard operating procedures totally bypassed, specialized forensic teams completely ignored, and the exhibits themselves were ultimately moved to an unsecure location. As we go through this, keep one central thesis in mind. This wasn't just sloppy police work. These testimonies reveal a massive, multi-witness failure that literally created the perfect storm for seized drugs to just disappear.
Okay, let's dive into our forensic dossier for today. We'll be covering 1. The timeline of disappearance. 2. Documented contamination of the scene. 3. Contradictions and institutional friction. 4. The conflict matrix. And finally, 5. The drop-off.
Section 1. The timeline of disappearance. Let's break this down hour by hour.
All right, starting in the morning. Warrant Officer Magane, who actually admits on record that he's mostly desk-bound, gets a call from a traffic officer about an informant's tip. So they head over to the Scania yard in Aeroton. By midday, they've cracked open a shipping container and found 23 black bags. But instead of waiting for the narcotics specialists, they just removed them. Fast forward to the afternoon, and proper forensic processing, like calling in the local criminal records center, is completely bypassed. By the time evening rolls around, the chain of custody is in absolute pieces as the exhibits are transferred to a facility simply known as Pretoria College.
And honestly, what's absolutely staggering in the commission transcripts is Magane's behavior here. You have an officer with 0 experience handling major drug busts, working alongside a traffic officer, literally instructing civilian warehouse staff to load 23 bags of suspected cocaine into the back of his open-service bakkie. Just let that sink in for a second. They're physically moving a massive quantity of unverified narcotics into an open-air vehicle way before the specialized units even show up to secure the scene.
Moving on to Section 2. Documented contamination. This is where we really lose the crime scene.
The physical integrity of this bust was just completely compromised. I mean, officers openly admitted on the record to handling these 23 drug bags with their bare hands. They moved the exhibits out of their original location way too early. They entirely skipped calling the local criminal records center. And, perhaps the wildest detail of all, they allowed the informant's untagged luxury vehicle to just sit right there inside the active, unsecured crime scene. It's clear that multiple individuals actively compromised this bust from minute one.
Not surprisingly, the chairperson of the commission directly called out Makgane on this absolute absurdity. Think about it. You've got an office-bound warrant officer, a traffic officer, and civilian warehouse employees all handling a massive cocaine haul without gloves. The commission explicitly labeled this a second stage of tampering. When the absolute core principle of policing is preserving the scene, seeing this level of manual, undocumented interference is deeply, deeply troubling. Then we have to talk about the massive security risk. The informant, the guy who tipped off the traffic officer in the first place, was driving a BMW 7 Series with absolutely no license plates. And where was this car? Parked a mere 300 meters away, right inside the Scania premises, during an active, unsecure raid that just yielded 715 kilos of contraband. Honestly, you don't need to be a seasoned detective to spot the massive red flags of leaving an untagged car right next to an open, unverified drug container.
Section 3. Contradictions and friction. Let's see what happens when the stories start clashing.
You know, when procedures break down, people inevitably start pointing fingers. Just look at Magane's defense. when he's pressed on exactly why he threw 23 bags of unverified drugs into his open bakkie, he claims he was actually trying to safeguard the exhibits. He says he wanted to make sure they weren't stolen and that he had no intention of driving away. So he's basically framing his blatant crime scene tampering as some sort of heroic preservation attempt.
But Advocate Kamala shuts that defense down instantly on the record. He fires back saying, they are tampered with if a whole lot of people handle them with their bare hands. You were clueless, and you knew that you were clueless. Wow, it's just a devastating moment of accountability, because at the end of the day, ignorance of standard procedure does not excuse the active destruction of a crime scene.
So that begs the question, who was actually in charge of this mess? Well, we have a massive, direct contradiction. Makgane claims he yielded authority, essentially treating the scene as belonging to Traffic Officer Mashaba since it was his informant. But then you have Lieutenant Colonel Sebola's testimony forcefully insisting, "I am the scene manager." We're looking at explicit friction over command here. Multiple officers are either claiming total control or totally shifting the blame to someone else the second it becomes convenient.
Sebola testified directly, saying, "If I am in charge of the scene, I'm now the crime scene manager, giving instructions of what needs to be done." And he actively called out the other officers, pointing out that if they truly thought they were in charge, who did they call from forensics? Who was maintaining the SAP-13 exhibit register? The answer, obviously, is nobody. The entire command structure was a complete illusion.
Section 4. The Conflict Matrix. Let's cross-reference these stories.
All right, let's methodically map out these shifting testimonies to see exactly how this institutional friction created the ultimate blind spot. First up, scene management. Magane says he yielded to a traffic officer. Phakula claims he followed the generals. But Sebola? He claims absolute command. The core contradiction here is a total lack of unified leadership. Next, moving exits. Magane says he moved them for safety. Phakula says he arrived and they were already moved. Sebola claims he only opened a bag to show the quote-unquote clueless cops what was inside. Literally everyone is justifying their own tampering. And finally, arrest protocol. Magane arrests the truck driver for dealing before the bags were even opened. Premature arrests based on unverified evidence. As you can see, their stories clash on literally every single investigative point.
Section 5. The Drop-Off. The final piece of the puzzle.
So the timeline is chaotic, the scene is utterly contaminated, and the command structure is a joke. Where do the 715 kilos of drugs actually go? This is where the custody chain completely evaporates. The logical destination, Boyson's SAPs, refused to take them, allegedly because the station commander didn't want them stored there. Forensics reportedly claimed they had zero space, so these incredibly valuable unsecured exhibits were diverted to a facility simply referred to as Pretoria College. Standard protocol wasn't just bent here, it was entirely abandoned.
And Pretoria College is a massive red flag. Sebola actually admitted in his testimony that this college lacks a SAP-13 exhibit register, which is the fundamental standard logbook for any evidence. There is no official police safe design for narcotics. There is no dedicated 24-hour guard for exhibits. As Sebola himself testified, if drugs are dropped at a place with questionable security, it is simply not appropriate. Guys, this is exactly how crucial evidence vanishes.
Which leaves us with one final, very provocative question to consider. When standard procedures are repeatedly bypassed, when crime scenes are actively contaminated by bare hands and untagged informant cars, and when massive exhibits are diverted into unsecure facilities with no logs and no safes, where exactly does pure negligence end and active complicity begin? The Madlanga Commission testimonies paint a deeply dark picture of institutional failure. It's ultimately up to this forensic audit to determine if it was just pure incompetence or if we're looking at something much, much worse.